So now that we know that the United States is this second beast of Revelation chapter 13, and I'm reading here from the English Standard Version, Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 10, we have the Antichrist. This is a picture of the Antichrist. We know the identity of the Antichrist, which continued in power for 42 months, also known as 1260 literal years, using the day equals year principle in our hermeneutic, that is our interpretive methodology for interpreting the symbols of Revelation chapter 13. A beast rising up out of the sea. Of course, this is an empire that rises out of a densely populated an area that there are a lot of people, multitudes of nations and tribes and kindreds and tongues. This is the papal Antichrist for 1260 years before receiving a deadly wound at the end of the 18th century, during which time the infliction of that deadly wound, which has been healing ever since, another beast would rise up out of the earth, also known as a sparsely populated area. And it would be lamb-like, two horns like a lamb. So this would, and by the way, lamb in the book of Revelation always refers to Jesus Christ, except for this one time. Here it's referring to the beast that rises up out of the earth, also called the false prophet. And notice that this is a beast, it is an empire, it is not a single solitary individual human being, nor is the sea beast a single solitary individual human being. It is an empire. That's what a beast means. Go back to Daniel chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, and you will see what a beast means. It means an empire. The second beast, the beast that rises up out of the earth, Revelation 13, 11 through 17, is in fact the United States. Lamb-like in its beginnings, that is, Christian in its beginnings, but it would speak like a dragon. It would eventually speak like Satan. Okay, and its goal is to get the inhabitants of the earth to worship the Antichrist, the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. And it does this, it gets people to worship the first beast, the world to worship the first beast by deception, by lying. This is why it's called the false prophet, because it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast, and worship the image. So worship by deception is the whole key here for the United States of America. This is the earth beast, is the United States of America. It also causes all. That is, it causes all. It forces all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave. Doesn't matter if you're the head of Amazon, right? Jeff Bezos. Doesn't matter if you're Bill Gates, rich. It doesn't matter if you're homeless, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or forehead, so that no one can buy or sell. Buying and selling presupposes that there be some medium of exchange. If you're going to buy or sell anything, you have to have some medium of exchange. And of course, what is the medium of exchange for the entire world? Pretty much the entire world. There's about 3 countries that aren't so much involved in this, but they're still involved in some way. And that is the United States dollar. The dollar has been the world's, and continues to be, the world's reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. Remember that. The United States dollar rules economically the world. And any challenge to the dollar will be met with force, military if need be, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So the whole purpose of the United States is to cause all, both small and great, to receive a mark, that is the mark of the sea beast's authority. This has nothing to do with RFID trips or barcodes or anything like that. Even though those things can be used as instruments to enforce the mark of the beast, none of those are the actual mark of the beast. The mark of the beast will be a spiritual mark. Okay? And it will manifest in works and people's thinking. So the forehead or their right hand, symbolizing their thoughts and their actions. So the consolidation of power in the Earth Beast in the United States. How do you do that? How do you consolidate power in the hands of fewer and fewer people? Well, we can look here. This is the Constitution of the United States. This is on archives.gov. I'm going to just enlarge this a little bit. So we got the preamble. We the people of the United States. If you've ever seen the old Schoolhouse Rock cartoons, you might have this memorized even. But here's Article 1, and we'll just look at Section 1. So legislative power. So obviously we have three branches of government in the United States, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. This was a system and was meant to be a system of checks and balances, so no one branch of government could be all powerful. In our legislative branch, this is the branch that is tasked with writing the laws. The executive branch is tasked with enforcing the laws. The judicial branch is tasked with interpreting the laws, is the basic structure here. But in our legislative branch, the writing of the laws, because if the United States is going to cause all, that is, force all, it will do so by law, by laws. We are a representative republic, and we have sway over the whole of the world in some way, shape, or form, economically, militarily, politically. So we have two bodies in our legislative branch of government. We have the Senate, which is two for every state. And in World War II, for example, we only had 96 senators because we only had 48 states. Hawaii and Alaska were not added to the United States until 1959. So that's long after World War II. And since then, we've had 100 senators. But here's what I want to focus on, the House of Representatives. This ought to be very plentiful right here. This was meant to be very plentiful. It was meant, the number of representatives was meant to reflect the population of the United States, whereas senators were simply meant to reflect that it's just two for every state. So, but the House of Representatives was meant to reflect the population. And here's what they had to say. The number of representatives shall not exceed one for every 30,000. That is one for every 30,000 people. Okay? One for every 30,000 people. And every state shall have at least one. Okay? And there are states that only have one member of the House of Representatives, whereas they have two senators. Some states have up to 38 and sometimes more members of the House of Representatives, in the federal government, compared to only two senators. But here was the goal. One for every 30,000. Okay? Now here's how you consolidate power in the hands of fewer and fewer. This is supposed to be proportionate with the population. So here we have the Reapportionment Act of 1929. I want to focus in on this because Wikipedia actually does a pretty good job here. The Reapportionment Act of 1929, also known as the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929, which set the number of U.S. House of Representatives seats at a constant 435. 435. So while the original Constitution wanted to increase the number of representatives commensurate with the population growth of the United States, this Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929 put a cap on that and said it can never be more than 435 seats. Okay? Now, I would imagine if somebody brought this to the United States Supreme Court and made this argument, that hopefully the United States Supreme Court would say, yeah, we need to increase the number of seats to probably a little over 6,000 seats in conjunction with the population growth. Because here's the U.S. population from 1900, and we're just going to go, so here's the year and the population. Let's go down to 1929, when that cap was set in stone, as they say, and it can't be changed unless somebody deliberately fights to change it. 1929, we had roughly 122 million people, 435 members of the House of Representatives. But notice the population growth, and we'll go up to 1999 because that's what this chart goes on. All the way to 1999. Look at that. 273 million people, but you still only get 435 seats. So we're more than doubling our population from 1929 just to 1999, and it's even more now. I think we're up to about 330 million, and as far as population, but we still only have 435 seats. That's ridiculous. That's a consolidation of power into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And in case you think this is only a representative of the House of Representatives, it is not. It is not, because our electoral college is made up of these 435 seats plus 100 for the Senate, so 535. And technically we have 538 because apparently Washington, D.C. gets 3 electoral votes. Washington, D.C. shouldn't get any votes. Anyone living in Washington, D.C. either votes for Virginia or Maryland. That's it. Washington, D.C. is not a state. They should have no Senate seats. They should have no House of Representatives seats. And they should have no electoral votes for President of the United States. That's how the president is elected, through the Electoral College, which is made up of the 435 House seats and 100 Senate seats. So 535, plus 3 for Washington, D.C., who shouldn't get any. But that's how you consolidate power, right there, in hands of fewer and fewer people. So this needs to be looked at and adjusted. We need, like I said, about probably more than 6,000 seats, a little more than 6,000 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, and we're stuck at a constant 435. That's why, voters in the United States, we really don't have a voice anymore. When I was a kid, rock the vote was the big thing. Rock the vote. Let your voice be heard. Write your congressman. Get involved. All this stuff. Very difficult to get involved when you have a limited number of seats, because each one of these seats represents more and more people. I think right now every seat represents roughly 720,000 people, versus the original Constitution says the number of seats should represent about 30,000 people. Now, I'd be happy with 60,000 people. Instead, if you look at this, it's roughly 720,000, somewhere in there, which is a ridiculously low amount. So consolidation of power in the hands of few. That's what we have in the United States today. That's really all I wanted to talk about today. Yep, euro. In my next video, I think I'm going to talk about the United States dollar and its supremacy around the world. We could look at NATO enlargement from 1949. Enlarge this a little bit. NATO enlargement from 1949 all the way up to 2009. So you can see NATO nations. And the reason I bring this up is because NATO is the United States. NATO does not exist without the United States. Same thing with the United Nations. The United Nations is not a thing without the United States. So NATO is not a thing without the United States. And you can see the expansion of NATO nations more and more eastwardly toward Russia. Whereas some of these were even former Soviet nations, former USSR nations. It was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. That's the USSR, former USSR. Some of these are even NATO nations now. Okay, so you can see Russia seeing NATO, knowing NATO is really the United States, pushing eastbound from Western Europe east toward Russia. And I'm most certainly not a Russian apologist in any way, shape, or form. I'm simply pointing out how this earth beast, the United States, is expanding its power. and of course consolidating its power in the hands of fewer and fewer because of this, that is internally, and then externally expanding in the world. So much so that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is for the sole purpose, or at least one of the main purposes here, um, is to weaken the euro, which is exactly what it's doing. Now, if in case you think that because the dollar, understand something, has been the world's reserve currency since 1944. It's been the world's reserve currency since 1944. Ever wonder why the UK, the United Kingdom, never went to the euro? There's a reason for that. They knew the euro was going to be a competitor for the dollar, and our British friends wanted nothing to do with any competition against the United States because they know who's who in the zoo. Okay? This is why Boris Johnson, and this is from Washington Examiner, Boris Johnson's farewell message. Here it says stay close to Americans. That's not what he said. He said stay close to the Americans. The Americans. Okay? Let's make sure we know. I want to use these last few seconds to give some words of advice to my successor, whoever he or she may be. Number one, stay close to the Americans. Okay? Boris Johnson knows who's who in the zoo. Everyone knows who's who in the zoo, and it's none of these countries. It is the United States. And how do we do that? By making other countries trade oil in the dollar. Here's a paper from 2003. So this is post 9/11. This is 2003. When we were ramping up, or at least there was talk, the George W. Bush administration was ramping up to go to invade Iraq and usurp Saddam Hussein. What did Saddam Hussein do that was so bad? Well, we were told and lied to by the Bush administration and those who supported it, that somehow Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which was shown to be an outright lie. Gross exaggerations, incredible inaccuracies, as it trotted out a litany of paper-thin excuses for making war on Iraq, along with its two supporters, Britain and Australia, of course, because the British know who's who in the zoo, and everybody else does, but the Brits are pretty smart with regard to intelligence and intelligence agencies and intelligence services. I mean, we learned our intelligence from them. It has shifted its ground and reversed its position with the barefaced contempt for its audience, etc., etc. Where does this desperation for war come from? There are many things driving President Bush administration to invade Iraq, unseat Saddam Hussein, and take over the country. But the biggest one is hidden and very, very simple. It is about the currency used to trade oil, and consequently who will dominate the world economically in the foreseeable future. The U.S.A. or the European Union, specifically the euro as the currency. Let's see. Silence in the general media. Of course, silence in the general media is a huge thing. Omission of key relevant facts means it's a lie. It's dishonest. This is why when people are sworn in an American court of law, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, not omitting key relevant information. Of course, the George Walker Bush administration lied about the purposes for going into Iraq. It was like a mantra for them: weapons of mass destruction, and all this nonsense. The debate is not about whether America would suffer from losing the U.S. dollar monopoly on oil trading. That is a given. Rather, it's about exactly how hard the USA would be hit. Yeah, and we're not going to put up with it. Smart money seems to be saying the impact would be in the range from severe to catastrophic. USA could collapse economically. Yeah, if the U.S. dollar was not the world's reserve currency, it'd be terrible. for the U.S. That's why it always will be and will continue to be, and we will use military force to ensure that it stays that way. The key to all this is the fiat currency for trading oil. Under an OPEC agreement, all oil, look at this, all oil has been traded in US dollars since 1971. Notice this was after the dropping of the gold standard under President Richard Nixon, that scoundrel. The dropping of the gold standard. In other words, when foreign investors in the dollar, when they had dollars, they could always at any time trade in their dollars for gold. So when foreign investors started seeing that the United States was printing more and more dollars, and when you do that, you devalue that currency, you devalue the dollar when you print more. That's why there is no such thing as inflation. I hope everybody understands that. Inflation doesn't exist. It's not a thing. Inflation is actually a reflection of the devaluation of the currency. That's what inflation is. It's your dollars are worth less than they were yesterday. So all these foreign investors, or at least some of them, saw that the United States was printing more and more dollars, making their dollars worth less. So they would trade them in for gold. Nixon put a stop to that, dropping of the gold standard in 1971, which makes the US dollar the de facto major international trading currency. If other nations have to hoard dollars to buy oil, then they want to use that hoard for other trading too. This fact gives America a huge trading advantage and helps make it the dominant economy in the world. Okay? So let's jump down to here. In 1999, Iraq, with the world's second largest oil reserves, switched to trading its oil from the dollar into euros. When they did that, when Saddam Hussein did that, he signed his own death warrant. We used military force to gain back Iraq trading its oil in dollars rather than euros. As soon as we usurped Saddam Hussein, that's what we did. And this was written before we went into Iraq. This is March 2003. This was written before we went into Iraq. But that was the result. So this is an interesting paper because it's kind of historical at this point. When Saddam Hussein switched his oil contracts to trading in euros rather than the dollar, the euro was rising against the dollar. Iraq had given itself a huge economic free kick by switching. Iran started thinking about switching too. Venezuela, the fourth largest oil producer, began looking at it and has been cutting out the dollar by bartering oil with several nations, including America's bête noire, Cuba. Russia is seeking to ramp up oil production with Europe, and this was back in 2003 now. Is seeking to ramp up oil production with Europe, trading in euros, an obvious market. With Europe, so Europe is the market for Russia's trading and selling oil and their oil production, selling it to Europe, increasing the value of the Europe. The greenback script, and he means the U.S. dollar. The greenback is actually refers to something Lincoln did during the Civil War. And I think all these are gone now, the greenbacks, or at least taken out of circulation to a certain extent. That's what he means by the greenback. The U.S. dollar is not the same as the greenbacks that Lincoln initiated, but this author seems to have just used them synonymously, the greenback synonymously with the U.S. dollar. So the U.S. dollar's grip on oil trading and consequently on world trade in general was under serious threat. I don't think it was under that much of a threat, but it was certainly seen as a major stepping stone. So serious threat, okay. If America did not stamp on this immediately, this economic brush fire could rapidly be fanned into a wildfire capable of consuming the United States economy and its dominance of world trade. America's precarious economic position. So here's the, let's see, the U.S. solution to this. America's response to the euro threat was predictable. It has come out fighting. It aims to achieve 4 primary things by going to war with Iraq. One, and this isn't just about the war in Iraq, this is just the immediate context with which this author is talking about. This goes to any place now that would try to threaten the dollar. Safeguard the American economy by returning Iraq to trading oil in U.S. dollars, which we have done. So the greenback is once again the exclusive oil currency, which it is. Send a very clear message to any other oil producers just what will happen to them if they do not stay in the dollar circle. Iran has already received one message. Remember how puzzled you were that in the midst of moderation and secularization, Iran was named as a member of the axis of evil? Another goal, place the second largest reserves of oil in the world under direct American control. Another point, provide a secular subject state where the U.S. can maintain a huge force, perhaps with nominal elements from allies such as Britain and Australia, to dominate the Middle East and its vital oil. This would enable the U.S. to avoid using what it sees as the unreliable Turkey, the politically impossible Israel, and surely the next state in its sights, Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Al-Qaeda, and a hotbed of anti-American sentiment. Another point, severely set back the European Union and its euro, the only trading bloc and currency strong enough to attack the U.S.A.'s dominance of world trade through the dollar. That's the point. Again, you guys can read this on your own, archive.globalpolicy.org. And just the Global Policy Forum, Not Oil But Dollars versus Euros by Jeffrey Hurd, written in 2003. Again, this paper was written in 2003. But it makes so much sense today when you look at NATO enlargement. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is hurting the euro. Let's see here. So this is from Reuters.com, September 5th, 2022. Europe heading for recession as cost of living crisis deepens. Notice here. You can read the paper, but right here is what I want to focus on. Despite those expectations, the euro dropped below 99 US cents. 100 US cents is a dollar. A dollar is made up of 100 pennies or 100 cents. Okay. So the euro dropped below the dollar for the first time in 20 years on Monday after Russia said gas supply down its main pipeline to Europe would stay shut indefinitely. Okay. So it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine is accomplishing what the United States, or at least the ruling elite in the United States, wants it to accomplish. That is to weaken the euro. And it was that way in 2003 as well with the invasion of Iraq. And so it is just as important today with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine that the euro is kept in check so as to not be a competitor of the dollar. Boris Johnson knew it. He knows to stay close to the Americans. The Brits know who's who in the zoo. I mean, look at the movie Casino Royale. I mean, that was the Casino Royale, not from way back in the day, but the new ones with Daniel Craig, right? Arguably the best James Bond. I don't know. Some people say yes. Some people say no. I think it was a pretty darn good selection for James Bond. But in Casino Royale, what happened? He was funded by the Treasury, the British Treasury, to play in this poker game. And once he lost the first amount of money, Vesper Lind wasn't going to authorize more money until Felix Leiter, right? And he called himself a brother from Langley. And he didn't mean I'm black. He meant I'm a brother from Langley. I'm with the CIA. Okay, CIA working in conjunction with MI6. And he said, I'll stake you. I'll stake you in the game. And James Bond's like, and if I win? And Felix said, does it look like we need the money? Right? That's accurate. That is totally accurate. Right? The Brits have to kind of, their money is much more important to them because it's worth far less than the dollar. The dollar is kind of like, hey, we got money to spend, and if not, we'll just print more and make the whole world pay for it, including our own people. because American citizens are in debt for about, I think it's up to about 30 to $31 trillion worth of U.S. national debt right now. And by the way, in 2003, George Bush, he became president in 2001. So the very first year of the 21st century, that's 2001. The year 2000 was the last year of the 20th century, of the 1900s. 2001 was the first year of the 21st century. So when George Bush stepped into presidential office in 2001, he inherited a $4.5 trillion national debt. That's what the national debt was when he became president. In 8 years, 2 terms as president, he doubled it to 9 trillion. And in case you think Barack Obama was some great hero, Barack Obama stepped in 2009 with a $9 trillion debt. And what did he do? In 8 years, he doubled it again to 18 trillion. To 18 trillion. And now we got 4 years of we had 4 years of President Don John, and we're gonna have roughly 4 years of Sleepy Joe. My prediction is it'll probably be close to 36 trillion. Right now we're about between 30-31 trillion dollars of national debt. But this is how the United States has gained its dominance throughout the world. It uses military force to ensure that the dollar remains and continues to be, and even gains more dominance in the world as the currency of the world. Okay? The dominant currency of the world. So that's all I have to say on that. Lack of representation, of course, right here for the American people. That's why people around the world, please don't blame me as an American citizen for what my government does. I have very little say in what my government does, in what my federal government does. The reason is because we have a constant 435 seats. British folks in the UK are better represented than American citizens in the United States. You have more members commensurate with your population in Parliament than we do in our House of Representatives. For you guys, I think it's roughly 1 to every 218,000, something like that. You know who has even better than us is Japan. Japan has, I think, 1 representative for roughly every 270,000 citizens. We don't. We have 1 for roughly every 720,000. That's ridiculous, and that is not in line with the spirit of the Constitution. So this should be looked at and reassessed very quickly if we want to have any say. And again, NATO is the United States. There's no question about that. So let me know what you think in the comments below. It's really dry down in the basement. Lord willing, we'll talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.